and welcome to another Derby City News Profile. This time we are talking to Republican candidate for Kentucky Secretary of State, Bill Johnson. Bill, thank you for joining us.
Good to be here.
Bill, I would like to start off by having you tell our viewers a little bit about yourself and about your family.
Well, sure. I'm a military veteran, 10 years in the Navy as a nuclear propulsion engineer. I'm a electrical engineer by degree with a master's in business. I've been in business for the past 13 years, working for various large and small companies. Most recently, I got my teaching eligibility. I received a call from a local high school principal who wanted me to help tutor her math and science students. So that's what I've been doing most recently as I run for office.
Well, that leads me to my next question, because I checked your website. I did a little bit of research on you and
Sure.
stalking you, but your website's called KentuckyBill.com.
Right.
Is that correct? Okay. And I noticed that you are trained for several occupations. You are an engineer, you have a business degree, you're a pilot, a teacher, an airplane mechanic, and probably a host of others.
Right.
But tell me about these passions in your life for just doing all these different things.
Well, I love math and science. And so an engineer degree fit right into my love for math and science. And what I did in the Navy as a nuclear engineer was all about math and science. So I have a passion for math and science and technology. As a pilot, I love the freedom to be able to fly. We're the only country in the world where you can get in a personal airplane and fly almost anywhere in our country without ever talking to the government. Now, some see that as a very elitist type of an occupation, but you can buy an airplane for the price of a new car, a small four-place airplane. And then as an aircraft mechanic, I'm self-reliant. I can take care of my airplane. It's always been who I am. I like to be self-reliant, independent, able to do what I want to do with my own skills and abilities. So I've always worked hard continuously to improve myself, to improve my capabilities, and that's sort of who I am. It's about always constant improvement to make myself more independent, more capable, so I can take care of myself and my family. So that's the heart of who I am.
Okay, well, that's very inspirational. Last year, you ran as a Republican for the U.S. Senate seat against Trey Grayson and Rand Paul, and as we all know, Dr. Paul won that seat. What I was wondering is, what did you learn from that experience? And in other words, what do you think Kentuckians are looking for in their government? Because there's this struggle, this tension between should the government do more for the people than it's doing, or should it do less? What do you think Kentuckians are looking for?
Well, I think they're looking for smaller government. I think they want to be independent, unshackled from the requirements of government. And Kentucky government, and of course the federal government, has just grown to the point where it seems to be a part of everything we do as citizens. So I think they're looking for new leadership, people with new ideas, with the vision of reducing government, not going and expanding and making more laws, getting rid of some of the bureaucracy, cutting waste, cutting cost, and letting people once again take control of their lives. And I think they're looking for candidates who believe that, who through their own lives have demonstrated their willingness or their desire to be independent. I think that's the spirit people want to see, that they want to be independent themselves, and therefore they're going to want to get government out of other people's way. And that's what I'm all about.
Well, I was going to say, given the answer to my second question about you being trained for different areas, I think you've displayed perfectly what it means to be independent, as self-sufficient as you can be.
Well, I'll give you another example. When I built my house, I dug my own foundation. I wired the whole house. As an electrician, I learned later that I can only wire my own house. I can't wire anybody else's house because of bureaucracy and laws. So the government, although they allow me to, for example, wire my own house, I can't help somebody else wire their house or do it. You got to be a licensed
That's too bad.
electrician.
I was just thinking I had somebody that could wire my house, or
and I would read the books, I would get the code, and I would do it properly. So I like to do things myself.
Right.
That's what America was built on, is that rugged independence and our ability to take care of ourselves, do things for ourselves. And I want the government out of my way. I don't want them to ever tell me, like they do in Europe, that I can't wire my house, or I can't build my house, or I can't roof my house. It's my house, it's my land, and I want the government out of my way. And I want them out of my way in all aspects, including education. I think the federal Department of Education is unconstitutional. The federal government needs to get out of education, get that back to the local level, and let communities and school boards take responsibility for educating their kids. So I want to return the power returned to the voters.
Okay. I would like to switch gears now and discuss the position of Secretary of State. What exactly are the responsibilities of the Secretary of State? Many people are unfamiliar with the state position. They know about the federal national position that is appointed by the president, part of his cabinet. But tell me, what are the responsibilities of the Kentucky Secretary of State?
Well, first, the Secretary of State is the chief election officer. So overseeing the election process is a very important part of the duties of Secretary of State. Second is the Division of Corporations. So business filings, incorporating businesses, that paperwork and that process flows through the Secretary of State's office. The land office is an important part of the Secretary of State as well. The Kentucky State Seal is managed by the Secretary of State. So it's a very important role in terms of those aspects. And I think also Secretary of State in some ways is sort of the chief civics educator, talking about the need to vote, talking about government. So I think there's that very important role to talk to our kids and voters about civics.
Right, exactly. And that leads me into my next question, where you mentioned that in great deal on your website, and I've seen you at other occasions where you mention the priority of civic education. What have you found to be the current situation in Kentucky schools regarding civic education? And what would you do to change it if you think it needs to be changed?
Well, and by my own actions, get involved in the school system. I'm passionate about education. And I believe it is a local responsibility. Otherwise, I wouldn't have gotten involved. I volunteered, and then eventually they wanted me to come and help in a paid position. But I think locally we need to educate on civics and help the students understand they need to get involved in government. Because after all, when they are old enough to vote, they are now part of the process of electing our officials. And I've said before that each individual in America is a king or a queen. We're unique in that each king and queen decides who's going to be the bosses of our communities and our state and our federal government. So they need to understand how important it is for them to be involved in civics, in voting and getting involved. So I want to visit schools, talk about that, and encourage young students to think carefully about it. And also, students who look at civics are far more likely to believe in our free institutions as a country. And so the patriotic aspect, I think, is very important as well.
Okay. Something else that you mentioned on your website is, and you just mentioned it, was the idea of maintaining fair elections. That would be part of the responsibility of the Secretary of State. Groups such as ACORN have brought to the forefront the election fraud issues. What can you do should you be elected? What can you do to minimize voter fraud? And do you believe any additional laws should be passed that could minimize the potential for voter fraud?
Well, the most important issue, I think, is picture ID at the polls. Today in Kentucky, it's not a requirement to show any form of picture ID. And so I want to work with the legislature to pass a law requiring a picture ID to be able to have access to the voting booth. Because today you need a picture ID to get on an airplane, for example, a picture ID to drive a car. Most employers have picture IDs for their employees before they're allowed access to the building. So picture ID is sort of a fundamental way to control access. It's a way to make sure you are who you say you are before we give you access to that voting booth. So I think picture ID at the polls is extremely important to make sure that we can minimize opportunity for voter fraud.
Okay. And another responsibility that you mentioned was the fact that businesses, when they're first founded, they must file the necessary forms and paperwork with the Secretary of State's office. Some of this information, and I've found through personal experience, is very difficult to dig up, and very often, as was in my case, I had to hire an attorney, sometimes an expensive attorney, to dig up this paperwork. How do you propose that we minimize this type of red tape and allow our government to become more efficient, save money, save time?
Well, I've created some businesses myself, and I understand what you're going through. You either have to call a company corporation, for example, or one of these groups who are professionals at figuring out all the different things you need to file and do to incorporate and get a business set up. And it's far too complicated. I think we need to make sure it's simple online to be able to do it quickly, efficiently, and at low cost. I've always believed that if the government puts a requirement on a business, it's up to the government to make sure they can meet that requirement in an efficient, low-cost manner. And today, you're right, it's difficult to go through the whole process of setting up a business. And depending on what licenses you need, there are other local requirements as well. So you go through that whole process and you're still not sure, have you done everything you were supposed to do?
It would be nice to online have some sort of a to-do list. Right, exactly.
Of things to do. So a checklist is a very effective way for somebody like yourself or myself who are starting a new business to know they've met all the requirements. Because that's my biggest fear. I forgot something.
Right.
You know, I didn't get my tax ID, or I didn't.
And then you get your business started,
and suddenly you get this fine or penalty or bill, and you just had no idea.
Right.
And so I think that's a fear of a lot of people, and it certainly was mine as well. So I think a checklist would be a very good idea, and then have each item on the checklist linked back to the form that you need to fill out and create. Do it online, submit it, and you're done. So I think and I was a former chief information officer of a company as well, so I'm familiar with technology, how to manage information, the flow of information. So I think Secretary Grayson has done a good job getting that process started, and I think we need to continue to expand it, have it reach down into the local communities, for those communities that want to participate in the online process through some type of a checklist.
Okay. Well, your ideas have definitely helped us to inform our viewers, and thank you, Bill Johnson, for joining us today in our discussion about your personal life, and the office for which you're running, which is Kentucky Secretary of State. I believe you've helped us to inform people, and also help us to perhaps help the voters to decide, because although we did just have elections in November, and it seems like the next cycle is a long ways away, they'll be here before we know it. So thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.